Boys and girls, welcome back to the Newbie Photographer Podcast. A happy new year to you. This is the first episode coming back from the, not only the Christmas, but New Year's break. I hope it was a good holiday season for you, and I'm excited to just dive right back in. Here we are, January 4th. It happens to be a Wednesday, so happy hump day for anybody who is live streaming. And on that note, actually, don't be shy. For those of you that are live streaming with us today, to jump into the conversation. You could ask questions, comment, send us funny emojis. I'm about to introduce a brand new guest here for the Newbie Podcast for this Newbie Podcast episode, but we're going to be getting into a really not only interesting but important topic. And I'll introduce McKenzie here in just a second. For those of you that are not live streaming today, please make sure to follow us on Instagram, Newbie Podcast on Instagram. And if you follow us there, you can keep up to date with the upcoming live stream schedule. Would love to have you come be part of the show, the live show, and be able to engage with our guests, ask questions, and ultimately join in the conversation. So make sure to do that if you haven't already. Noobie, Newbie Podcast on Instagram. And on that note, I want to bring in our guest for today. McKenzie Bigliazzi is here. McKenzie, thank you for being willing to do this show with me.
Yes, of course. I was so excited to be on here. I always love talking to you.
Well, and I said this to you before, you were on the Boca podcast, so I do two photography podcasts for anybody who doesn't know, but I said this to you then, I'll reiterate it now, your energy that you bring to conversation, actually, your energy that you just bring to the world at large is absolutely amazing, which is always so much fun to be on the other side of.
Thank you. I try to leave things better than what they were.
That's actually a great way to put it, and it's kind of a simple idea, but if we lead with that intention day in and day out, it's cool how we can have an impact on the world. And that sounds kind of grandiose, but the reality is even being able to make a difference in an individual person's life. I think about this even on as simple as like I go to the Walmart and I'm in the checkout line and I actually have a conversation addressing the cashier by name and ask how their day is going. Like, it's amazing how people light up because they're not used to somebody actually giving a damn and caring enough to have a real conversation with them.
Yes,
So yeah,
absolutely.
leave it better, leave the world better than we came into it that day. I love that.
Yes. Thank you.
And you know what? We can just stop the podcast here. That's a good enough lesson for everybody.
Perfect. Great. We hit it.
Well, we're going to actually talk today, for anybody who may have already seen the title, we're going to talk about elopement photography. And because the Newbie Podcast, at least a lot of our episodes tend to be shorter format, this is kind of an introduction to elopement photography, certainly. But I want to give you an opportunity, first of all, just to briefly introduce yourself and your photography brand, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't start my business as an elopement photographer. I did my time in the standard wedding world. So I think that's important to know, is that I didn't just wake up one day and I'm in the elopement world. But my business and brand, so I'm a photographer and planner. I create elopement experiences for couples who don't see themselves reflected in the usual wedding world stuff. Like when you search Pinterest, you're not going to see my couples come up. So I focus on couples who don't really describe themselves as adventurous. They might not have great relationships with their family. They might not be supported by their family. I entered this world of being aware of the privilege that comes with having a wedding. There's a lot of privilege that comes with that, and a lot of my couples aren't lucky enough to experience that privilege. So they create a elopement experience that's all about them and nothing else.
And what was it that drew you to this particular business model? Because it's interesting. I can't help but at least kind of psychoanalyze the situation a little bit. I'm thinking okay, you have this genuine desire not only to make just an impact on the world at large, to leave it better than you stepped into it that day, but you're also obviously making an intentional effort to reach out and connect with those couples who maybe are on maybe the fringe is a little bit too dramatic a word, but on the outside of kind of mainstream culture. Why is that?
Mm-hmm. I think that when I was working bigger weddings, that's how I got my career started, and I'm so thankful for all those couples. I think that when I was doing that, me personally, I could not relate. I don't come from a traditional family. My parents are divorced when I was pretty young. There was a lot of stuff that went on along with that, and I know that when I was put in those standard wedding situations, I was kind of jealous of my couples feeling joy in these places that I know I probably won't experience. And I was like, I can't be the only one.
And how do you draw in that particular type of couple that you're describing? Are they finding you just naturally because of what you put out there, or is there some other way that you're getting these clients?
Yeah, I think it's me being myself in every way possible. I'm very open about my background. I'm very open that I struggle with both anxiety and depression. I am very open about that on all my social media outlets and on my website. If you go to my website, exactly what you read is exactly what you're going to get in person. So I think just putting out my vibes, sharing my truth, and being authentic to that, even though authentic is such a buzzword, but truly being authentic to my story and being honest about that creates a safe space for other people to also confront their truths and being authentic to themselves.
And then how does elopement photography compare to, you talked about coming from the typical wedding photography world, right? So how does elopement photography compare to that? What's a favorite thing about elopement photography in comparison, and maybe the thing that you don't quite like as much?
Yeah, absolutely. I fell in love with the intentionality of elopement photography. Because again, I do have to give credit where credit's due. I got started in standard weddings, and I'm sure my past couples are watching this being like, I thought you loved my wedding. I truly did. Don't come after me. But there's a lot less focus on the extra fluff of the wedding world, and more on how can we create an experience that we can relive over and over again, because standard weddings, you don't get to relive those outside of your video and photo.
That phrase standard fluff really resonates with me too, because it is, I've photographed weddings for over a decade, so I've been there, done that quite a bit.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, I love certainly the opportunity to be able to photograph these couples, the relationships I develop with them, but that fluff is something that just becomes a little bit annoying. Not only that, but the tendency toward repetition. Everybody just kind of fills in the same template and does the same stuff over and over and over and over again.
Yes, there's absolutely trends, and that also comes with going back to this idea of privilege. Some couples don't have the $30K to throw down on that extra fluff, so they want an experience that they can truly be present in and feel so good about, but also on their 1-year anniversary do all over again.
Again, I love that idea too. Okay, well, I would easily be able to park here with this, but I want to get to the practical takeaways for our listeners. I know this is a very short format show, but let's talk about the most important principles or idea that you feel from your experience and perspective drives a healthy and successful elopement photography business. And maybe just to give it a little context to McKenzie, how many years have you now been focused on elopement photography?
I think almost 3 years.
I'd say I would never guess that, even just in prep for our conversation today, going back through your Instagram feed. It's just that has been your focus. It seems like forever. But I just want to give that context for everybody listening in too. So from that experience with a focus on elopement photography, what are those, you mentioned to me before we started, you've got 5 big ideas or principles. What are those big ideas?
So my 5 big ideas are being client focused, honesty, organization, staying open-minded, and just full out practicing. So being client-focused, I think a lot of my my elopement clients, they're very much focused on, hey, nothing is ever about us, and this one day, I want it to be about us. So putting in the extra work so everybody has guides they give out. Well, my planning guide is based on their values, morals, and interests. So I get all types of couples. I get couples who would describe themselves as adventurous and love to hike, but a lot of times I get couples who are don't even suggest hiking. We want nothing to do with that. We will not survive. And I'm like, great, you're not going to get a guide on my 5 favorite hikes in Denver or whatever.
Actually, a quick question about that, and this is a bit of a tangent, but when you look at elopement wedding photography in our industry, especially the stuff that you tend to see on, and maybe it's just the photographers that I'm following, but the stuff that I tend to see on social media as it relates to elopement photography does seem to center around couples standing in a mountaintop somewhere. Is there a reason for that?
I could probably go off on a tangent about privilege in the outdoor world. but I don't think I want the conversation to go there. I think that people see mountains and the culture associated with mountains and being outdoors and associate that automatically with, okay, well, I have to be fit and adventurous and willing to go on these long hikes. But in Colorado, that's not the case. You can drive down the street and you'd be amazed and pull off and do your vows if you want to.
Yeah. I mean, certainly. I mean, you could. The whole idea that behind elopement, of course, is being able to get away and do it where and when you want to, with the people that you want to, which I think is great. I've only photographed maybe one or two elopements, if that. Definitely one, and the one that I got to photograph that I can think of offhand, it was in St. Lucia. I got a call one day from a bride who was like, "Hey, they were going to get married here in Chattanooga. We were going to get married here, but things have changed. Would you be okay with the idea of going and photographing our wedding in St. Lucia?" And of course, it took me about a split second to respond with, "Absolutely, of course."
Right.
And the images from that wedding are still some of my favorite ever, from the hundreds of weddings that I got to photograph. Absolutely amazing. But I just, it's interesting to me that seems to be the theme, which is elopements tend to be focused, at least in the last couple of years, on the outdoor scene. And the reality is, of course, they can happen in all kinds of places. But back to your first point, so client focused, meaning you're doing a little bit of research, shall we say, at least having conversation in some format to understand the client's values and letting that kind of drive the way that you approach photographing that elopement?
Right.
Okay, cool. So then take us to number 2. I was trying to take notes really, really fast, but I didn't get all of them written down. So tell me number 2 again.
Okay, number 2 is honesty. So a big thing I see, okay, so elopements, they're becoming, especially with us living post-pandemic, they're becoming more normalized, which is amazing. But in the outdoor world, what comes with being in the outdoor world is being knowledgeable and understanding risk of that. So honesty goes back to doing your own research and being educated, but also being honest with your type of lifestyle. So I kind of fell into elopement photography because my lifestyle, I climb, I hike, and I show that. I show that on my social media that I do these things. But if you're advertising that you're like an adventurous photographer, but you aren't quite equipped or knowledgeable or experienced in that world, you can give a client a really crappy experience because of that.
So honesty about what it is that you understand, what you're aware of, what you're capable of. Is that what you're talking about there?
Yes,
Okay.
all of that. And not just saying, oh, I'm an adventure photographer and jumping right into it. You really have to understand the risks of that and your own boundaries and your physical boundaries and things like that, because out here we have altitude and it'll take you out and you can get very sick.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, all right. So number 1, it is a client-focused effort. Number 2, there needs to be honest conversation about what you're actually capable of. And then what's number 3?
Number 3 is organization. So elopement couples tend to be pretty minimalistic, meaning, so on our side, they will depend on you for a little bit more than just a standard wedding couple, because they're not going to hire a planner. They're not going to hire all these extra people. You're basically their main source of organization, suggestions, advice, and guidance, and you are their light. So I'm on Dubsado. I love Dubsado, but you have to have a CRM. If I didn't have a CRM, I could not serve as many couples as I do.
Okay, organization driven by, in this case, technology that fortunately, I mean, these days, and I talk about this quite a bit, and I'm hoping at this point it's even a dated conversation, but it seemed like for the longest time, even until maybe the last few years or so, photographers weren't quite leveraging the technology that actually has been readily available for years now, and it doesn't cost us a lot, or in some cases it's even free. Some of these online tools, certainly like a CRM, certainly specifically like Dubsado. And of course, we'll link to that in the show notes for everybody who's curious about Dubsado. But the importance of organization, the important thing, or one of the important things to note here too, in addition to the better experience for their clients, is that as photography business owners, our lives day to day, week to week become so much more efficient when we have a system where everything lives. We don't have to worry about whether that information has been captured, where it is, if it's going to be lost, et cetera. It's just all in this one place you can always go to and rely on, which is so helpful. But it also helps us run our business more efficiently, which means less time in front of the computer and more time getting out and doing what we love.
Right. Exactly. Absolutely.
That's really, really good. Okay, so client-focused, honest conversation about our abilities. Organization. What's number 4?
Number 4 is staying open-minded. So my perspective on this is that the wedding world can feel judgmental. That's just the way it is. I think there's a standard that people try to push on other people for weddings, and elopement couples just don't care about that. They don't care about the judgment that they're going to get. If they did, they wouldn't be eloping. So on our end, staying open-minded as an elopement photographer and not putting our couples in boxes that have these wedding standards built all over them. It'll open up your world to so many different things and new traditions that you can introduce to your other couples. And I think if I would have stayed closed-minded in this like idea of what a wedding should be, I would not have all these unique new traditions that my couples are now doing.
I love that, actually. And again, to our earlier conversation, because especially if we come from the traditional wedding world and wedding photography world, we're used to just kind of the same thing. Like you can almost photograph a wedding in your sleep after you've done 10 or 20 of it.
Yes.
You know? And so learning to set that aside, not projecting that experience onto this new experience, which is elopement photography, where kind of the world is your oyster. You can do anything you want to, right?
Right. And it's hard. It's hard when you are waist deep in the wedding industry world to break free of that. And I saw myself a couple of times doing that, but once I let go of that and I was like, hey, there's no formula to this. You just have to guide them.
That's good.
There are so many other things.
That's good. And actually a good lesson for life too, but we'll save that conversation for another day.
Right.
So
right.
Staying open-minded was number 4. Number 5, take us to that last one more time.
Number 5 is practice. So I think this one is very, very underrated in the elopement world. Nobody talks about this, but now more than ever in my career, okay, this is my full-time job. It pays my bills plus some. I practice, meaning I do free shoots all the time because now in my world, I don't have a venue to play off of usually. It's usually outdoors with the same 2 people for up to 7 hours. So how do you get creative and how do you stay sharp and on top of that when you're really given very minimal things to work with? So I have to stay sharp and I always have to stay learning. So I'm always imposing courses and I'm always shooting for free for my own practice because I don't want to go blank on a job because I'm working with like the same background for the next 7 hours. You can't do that.
Yeah. I like that. Can you give us an example of what a practice session would look like? Like, for example, if you're going to photograph something or do a shoot for somebody at no cost to them as a means of practicing, what would that look like?
It's usually somebody that I know that I'll reach out to. I've reached out to strangers before to challenge myself a little bit more, but usually my friends are more down because they already know me. You know, it's not weird. Right. So I'll be like, hey, are you free? And depending on what I'm being inspired by at the time is where we'll go. So sometimes I'll want to go outside or sometimes I will rent an Airbnb and we'll go there and we'll do some indoor stuff. Wherever I'm feeling kind of weak, I will plan that out and then I'll just give them the photos for free. So really they just have to show up and go with all my weird stuff because I have to experiment to see what I like, what works, what doesn't work. I was like, just trust me and you'll get free photos out of it.
Practice your craft, though. That's It's interesting that you say that because I wouldn't have naturally thought about the need to do something like that. You're right that in wedding photography and again standard wedding photography world, you're usually faced with a lot of the same environment, and so it almost becomes, or it can become anyway, cookie cutter if you're not making an effort.
Yes.
In an elopement photography situation where the environments could be very, very wide ranging, there's a need to make sure that you keep your craft refined for the sake of creativity and variety, and ultimately being able to deliver really beautiful photographs. So that's a great reminder. Yes. Okay, this has been super practical. And by the way, we're under 20 minutes. Like you stayed right on point. I'm very impressed. But this is also a much broader conversation. And there's certainly a lot more to kind of dig into here. So this is a starting point. I'd love for you to share with our listeners where they can find and follow you online. And if you're okay, they shoot you a DM or two to ask a question or two. If they have any regarding our conversation, will you just share that information with them? Yeah,
absolutely. So I am active on both TikTok and Instagram. I am on Instagram at McKenzie_Bigliazzi, and I'm the only McKenzie Bigliazzi that will come up in Google. So if you just Google my name, you'll see all my stuff. And on TikTok, I'm at Colorado Elopement Photo. And my website, that's always available, and I have a whole education page for any of you that's interested.
Perfect. And I popped that up on the screen here, and we'll link to the TikTok account in the show notes at newbiepodcast.com as well. Just to pull up your website really quick, McKenzie, because it's a stunning site, and honestly a conversation for a whole separate conversation, because I'm very curious about what you've done with the site. It's just loaded with, like, there's so much to do and to see and to learn from it. But we'll make sure to link to this in the show notes. McKenzie, McKenzie, and the Bigliazzi, BIGLIAZZI.com. We'll put this in the show notes, of course. And there is a link there to the education section for photographers. So photographers listening and watching, make sure you take advantage. McKenzie, thank you again very much for doing the show today.
Thank
I really,
you.
truly appreciate this.
Of course.